AMD's brand new mid-range RDNA 3 GPUs are finally here, and in this video I'll be looking at the RX 7800 XT, seeing just how well it performs by building an awesome gaming PC that not only pushes this card to its limits, but also shows you guys the best parts to pair up with a card like this. Aimed squarely at the RTX 4070 with a $100 lower MSRP, this card is really exciting and could put AMD truly back at the front of the GPU market for the first time in a long time. Let's do this. Let me start by looking in detail at the 7800 XT, and if you'd like to skip straight to the benchmarks, that's fine. Check out the timestamps on your screen now. The 7800 XT is the slightly higher end of the two variants that were launched. AMD have also released a 7700 XT, and you can read our review of that card in the cards section now. The 7700 comes with 12 gigs of VRAM. This 7800 XT pushes things one step further with 16 gigs. That makes it crucially positioned well for 1440p, but if it's capable, a bit of 4K gaming as well. PowerColor themselves were kind enough to send us this unit directly, but by way of transparency, they won't have seen this video or any of our testing before it goes live to you guys. Inside the box, we of course have all the accessories, but the most important bit is of course this, the GPU itself. Now, first impressions are that this thing looks awesome. Not only does it fit fairly well into a 2-slot form factor, which is rare for higher end GPUs nowadays, but it's got a sleek backplate, full heatsink coverage, two 8-pin power connectors, and a nice triple fan cooling design. Unlike the Sapphire 7700 XT we looked at, they've gone a bit less ham on the red accents, which I personally like, but we'll come back to aesthetics in a moment. Let's look at the important stuff for now, the specs. The 7800 XT comes with 60 compute units. That's only around 10% more than the 7700 XT, and 60 RT accelerators. That's also about 10% more. The RT accelerators are of course going to help handle AMD's ray tracing technology, which is fast catching up to that of Nvidia's. You'll also find a base clock of 2124 megahertz with a boost up to 2430. Believe it or not, this is actually slightly slower than the 7700 XT, but of course it's not just about the speed that the chip is running at, it's also about, of course, that GPU processor itself. Both cards come equipped with GDDR6 memory, 12 gigabytes on the 7700 XT with 16 gigabytes on the 7800 XT. That plainly makes this a slightly more future-proof card, and of course, the more powerful the GPU, the more VRAM you're going to need. Personally, I think AMD have got the VRAM allocations for both of these cards spot on, especially for the price point. VRAM isn't cheap to integrate, and while that doesn't excuse Nvidia's VRAM, well, disasters of 2023, I think AMD have got it perfectly right here. Both cards are fairly power efficient, albeit not quite as good as the competition, with 245 watts on the 7700 XT and 263 watts on the 7800 XT. Compare this to 160 on the 4060 Ti and about 200 on the 4070, and you can see there is a little bit more power consumption here, but personally nothing to worry about. AMD are aiming the 7800 XT plainly at the 4070. You can see that from all of the press materials and graphs that they've released. The 7700 XT, presumably they're aiming it above the 4060 Ti, as it technically costs more than the 8 gig but less than the 16 gig variant. That would be my appraisal. Of course, I'll dive into performance in a lot more detail later once the system is built, but for now, let's get this thing put together. Let's look at what components you should actually pair up this 7800 XT with. Now for this build, I've gone fairly high-end with the rest of our config, tried to save money in areas where I think it makes sense. One of the areas I have splurged just a little bit is the CPU, as I've picked up the AMD Ryzen 7 7800 X3D. I was going to use the 7800 X3D until it broke. Hopefully it's still working in one piece. This is the best gaming CPU you can buy right now. It hasn't got quite as many cores or threads as some other chips on the market, but if gaming is what you're after, this is mightily impressive. At well under $400 at the time of recording, though latest pricing and availability will be found in the description below, it really is a cracking deal and beats out so many of Intel's other options at this price point. Technically, the Ryzen 5 7600X would also work. That's master chip I opted to use in our 7700 XT build, which you can view in the cards section now. This comes with AMD's 3D cache. Basically, it's stacked cache. Cache is one of the biggest constraints you get in modern day CPUs, and AMD have added a bucket load more of it, a truckload more of it to alleviate this problem, and that's what's seen such fantastic performance from this chip and its fellow processors in the X3D lineup. In terms of a motherboard, obviously we need something to install all of these parts into, and that is where this comes in. The GeekaWhat X670 Aorus Elite AX. AMD motherboards are a bit confusing right now. You've got X670, B650 and A620, which are our three chipsets, ranging from highest end to lowest end. But you'll also find motherboards with an E designation on the end that also support PCI Gen 5. This board doesn't, and instead gives you cost savings. But with cards like the 7800 XT not requiring PCI Gen 5, and the M.2 slot still having Gen 5 support, personally, no issues here. It still comes with all the same features we know and love, including DDR5 memory support, front panel USB 3.1 Gen 2 Type-C, rear I/O is also pretty solid, loads of USB ports, Wi-Fi 6, more USB 3.2s, and a 2.5 gig Ethernet. This board is totally stacked. And I think the last time I checked, this goes for around $260, $270 US. As far as I'm concerned, an absolute bargain for such a high-end, feature-rich motherboard. Oh, and of course, how could I forget, you get great overclocking support on the CPU as well. So there really isn't too many qualms with this board, if any, especially for the price point. Drop the Ryzen 7 processor in, line up the triangles, add the retention arm, lovely jubbly. DRAM is next, and I've picked up a Kingston HyperX Fury DDR5 memory kit. When it comes to DDR5, prices have just fallen so incredibly quickly. And with a build like this, you want in the region of 32 gigabytes. 16 gigs isn't going to be enough, especially when the graphics card's got 16 gigs of memory on its own. And of course, 64 gigs is probably a bit overkill and expensive for a system like this one. Drop the RAM in, nice and easy. No need to be considering DDR4 anymore, even for Intel builds where it's still supported on the latest generation. It just isn't particularly future-proof. The final thing to pop into the motherboard at this stage is the M.2 drive. I managed to pick up this MP600GS from Corsair for $104. As I say, all this pricing can change, but for a 2TB Gen 4 drive, I was reading an article the other day about how much Gen 4 drives have fallen in price. It's absolutely astonishing and means there's no excuse for having fast storage, even on a budget. Not that this build is particularly budget oriented. I also must admit, I've told a bit of a lie. I said that was all of the motherboard prep done. It isn't quite. I am going to go ahead and open up the CPU cooler to start the installation of that now, while the board is out the case and easy to access. This is the Cooler Master Master Liquid Core 360. The reason I picked this is the price. Available for around $100, it's one of the best value 360mm rads I've ever seen. Go for the 360mm rad if it fits in the budget, and it will look a lot better in the case, work more efficiently for cooling. It makes just more sense overall, and gives us 3 fans for added airflow. Looking at the manual, and there is actually hardly any prep required, just these 2 brackets here, which will add onto the pump block of the cooler itself, and they'll slot over the included plastic brackets on the AMD motherboard a little bit later. So for now, that's all done and out the way, and I can move on to the case. Speaking of which, here it is. The Be Quiet, wasn't very quiet of me, was it? Shadow Base 800 FX. Now, I first saw this case at Computex. I'm saying that a lot recently. Here's something I saw at Computex. And it's here. It's in person. They've actually released it. It's come to market. Great. This is the Shadow Base 800 FX. And as it says on the tin, it has impressive lighting with exceptional airflow. Genuinely, not being sarcastic, the 2 qualities in a case that I actually look for. Great lighting, great airflow. So let me open this up. It is literally box fresh. And here it is. Look at that. I mean, first impressions, it's a Be Quiet case. The build quality is awesome. Airflow, they weren't lying on the box. If you take the front panel off, then remove the dust filter, there are 340mm ARGB fans up front. You see these little contact pins? That's for the RGB on the front panel. Loads of airflow potential in this case. And of course, we've got the 360mm rad, which is going to go, I think, at the top to give us even more cooling and even more airflow. Best piece of advice I've got with any case is take off all of the side panels. You can also see at the back here, the biggest PCB, RGB and fan controller I have ever seen. So we've got spare, well, 1, 2, 3, 4 spare fan and addressable RGB cables, which for the cooler is actually going to save my bacon. I mean, I can control everything through the case. I love how spaced out it is. I love the build quality. Layout looks awesome. I'm fast becoming a huge fan of GeekaWhat cases, and as you can see, you get your accessory box just here on the motherboard tray, so you can't miss all of the screws that you need to put the motherboard in. Slide the motherboard into place. Look at that. All the standoffs are all okay, given the fact this is an ATX board in an ATX case. There we are. Lovely stuff. That all aligns. 3 screws at the top, 2 across the middle, and 3 down the bottom. That's because the center standoff, as pointed out with my handy pair of scissors, is a raised one to keep the motherboard into place. Nice and easy. At this stage, while the case is flat, I'm also going to do the CPU cooler. My thinking is that we'll have the fans obviously in exhaust, pulling air out of the case, and the radiator sitting something like this, tubes like that, and the fans underneath. So I'm going to add the fans onto the radiator first, then install the pump, and then secure the radiator to the top of the GeekaWhat case. I don't want to remove the front fans or go for a push-pull config. I think the top will make the whole thing look a bit more full, and of course provide us that nice balanced air pressure with 3 140s bringing in the air, and 3 120s, and a single 140 taking the air out the top and the back. It's at this point in the build where we can finally pop in the GPU, and I noticed a little bit earlier when I unboxed this card, I think it's got an RGB ring or like light bar that goes all the way round, and my goodness me, am I so excited. Now then, let me remove some PCI lanes, shall we? So let's have a look where this thing's gonna go. Top slot over that PCI slot. Yeah, lovely stuff. That, I mean, it fits really, really well. Design-wise, this thing is stunning. Need to take out the second and third PCI slot covers before sliding the GPU and getting it nicely secure. You can see it looks really well proportioned in this case, and the next stage is to deal with all the power for not only the GPU, but all of the other components too. That's going to be facilitated by this, the Cooler Master V850i Gold, an ATX3 PCI Gen 5 80 plus gold certified power supply with a 10-year warranty. It's got a lot of features, many of which we don't actually need, but it is going to do the job nicely for this system. AMD cards, of course, don't use that 12-volt power connector, but of course, that isn't too much of a problem, as you still get all the standard 6 plus 2 pin connections for good measure. I'm going to pop these easy DIY 5 cable extensions in to round things off nicely, but I think it's looking pretty good. And with that, the build is finally complete. All that's left to do now is boot this thing up, but also how it performs. I'll rejoin you for our full benchmark section after a short GeekaWhat montage. Starting off with Call of Duty's Modern Warfare 2 at 1440p, DLSS and FSR have been enabled where available on their respective AMD and Nvidia cards. In this title, the 7800 XT performed really well. In fact, so well it was on par with the 4080. A card that costs, I want to say, nearly double the price of the 7800 XT. It very easily beats out the 4070, a $500 MSRP card, and the RTX 4070 Ti, a card that's more commonly going for the $600 to $700 region. Move through into Warzone 2 at 1080p this time, and the 7800 XT continues this path of impressive results, beating out the 4070 Ti and the 4070. There is a noticeable difference between this and the new 7700 XT, which costs $50 less, making, I think, the extra money certainly worthwhile, while there is a defined gap between it and the next card in AMD's lineup, the 7900 XT. Jump up to 1440p in Warzone 2 and the 7800 XT again performs well, 143 FPS, just short of the 4070 Ti, but it very comfortably puts the RTX 4070 to bed, with a huge frame rate differential that really is quite unbelievable when you consider this card costs $100 less than its direct 4070 competition. Apex Legends also delivers strong frame rates too, 1440p high. The 7800 XT again impressively beats out the 4070 and 4070 Ti, putting itself near level pegging with the far more pricey RTX 4080. The difference in this title between the 77 and 7800 XT is quite staggering and shows how spending that extra money really could be beneficial if you're shopping at this price point. Move up to 4K and the extra VRAM of the 7800 XT, the 16 gigs versus 12 gigs on the 7700 really shows its hand. And the 7800 XT beats out all of AMD's last gen competition apart from its own 6950 XT. It beats out the 4070 Ti, 3090, 4070, 80 Ti, all very comfortably. As I say, the 7700 XT has a weaker showing, so be aware of that. In Hogwarts Legacy at 1080p high, the 7800 XT also stacks up well, with 128 FPS on average. More than the 70 Ti, more than the 7700, and more than the 4070. And don't even look at the likes of the 4060 Ti or AMD's own Radeon 7600, this is a card that leaves those in the dust. Move through into Hogwarts Legacy at 1440p high, and the 7800 XT again performs well. Positive result after positive result, beating out the 4070 Ti, 7700 XT, and 4070. In Fortnite at 1080p competitive settings, just for the fun really, the 7800 XT pulled in over 300 FPS, again disposing of all of its nearest rivals apart from the 4070 Ti. The very fact that I'm comparing this card so closely with the 4070 Ti, a card that at MSRP costs multiple hundreds of dollars more, is a testament to not only the performance AMD have provided here, but some of the frankly astonishing pricing that Nvidia have implemented in a number of their releases. F1 2022 is next. As mentioned in my 7700 XT review, which you can check out in the cards now, we will be revisiting these numbers for F1 23, but we wanted to give you guys as much data as possible now. The 7800 XT clocked in with a staggering 345 FPS, making even the likes of DLSS 3.0 with frame generation not exactly helpful for Nvidia here, disposing of the 4070, 6750 XT, and 4060 Ti. The 7700 XT has a shallower lead in this instance over its competition, but still very impressive and not bad results by any means. Move up to 1440p, and again the 7800 XT shows its performance prowess, beating out the 4070, 4070 Ti, and 3080, only falling short to the RTX 4080 rather unbelievably. In Overwatch 2, the 7800 XT stacked up really well again, 368 FPS. We're entering an era now where so many of these popular games like Apex, Overwatch, Fortnite, even likes of Warzone, which are harder to run, are so easy for some of these new real modern cards, and it shows how much power the 7800 XT has. Move through into the last title, and forgive us for the lack of data here, we retested using the day one patch that was released today or yesterday, depending on when this video goes out. Either way, we retested using all of the latest day one patch data and optimizations, and the 7800 XT beat out the 4070, 4070 Ti, and of course its younger sibling, the 7700 XT. We can't at this stage tell you how it stacks up against the 7900 XT or other last gen cards, but we are working on it. Overall, the 7800 XT has proved incredibly impressive in my opinion. Remember, this is a $499 GPU. That's $100 cheaper than the 4070, $200 cheaper than the 4070 Ti, and at $499, rather unbelievably, the same price as Nvidia's new 16GB 4060 Ti. It really is remarkable. I've been impressed with this card, and you can learn more about all the technical nitty-gritty at the review linked in the description below.